The show is on!
JohnFord.radio.
Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Divided America, and all the sinking ships at sea. It's the John Ford Podcast, the Evening Rancor. Any links mentioned on the show are available at johnford.radio. Welcome to the Evening Rancor, the John Ford Podcast.
That's rock and roll, baby. That reminds me of a guy I worked with in Miami, Jim White. Long Jim White used to go by on the air at WSHE. And he'd pull away from the mic, get the best mic technique, and say, "Good morning, rock and roll," or something like that. But boy, it was so infectious. He was so good at that. All he had to do was just say that good morning, but pull away from the mic, "Good morning, rock and roll," and be, and it was so infectious. Didn't matter what else he said. It was just that one line buried in the music, off mic. God, that was cool sounding. I think the last I heard of Jim White was as part of the Bo and Jim show in Dallas, on the rock station there. The one that Redbeard was on, I can't remember the name of it. And there's a little example of how one little shtick behind the mic can make you popular or make you interesting to listen to.
No.
And there's another example of it, Redbeard. I remember, he used to get so much press in all the radio trades. Redbeard this and Redbeard that. And he would interview a lot of rock stars, something I always considered really boring because, let's face it, musicians are really kind of boring. They want to talk about their guitars. I always wanted to talk about groupies or something with the musicians, and they didn't want to talk about that.
No.
I remember one interesting conversation I had with the drummer of the Police when he was doing some sort of opera thing or something. Stuart Copeland, right? And we spent 5 minutes talking about how much of a douche that Sting was. I'd never even met Sting, but I could just tell by looking at him and listening to him, the guy was a total tool.
All right.
And from the conversation I had with Stuart Copeland, he sort of agreed as well that, yeah, Sting was a total tool.
Wow.
And Sting, if you're listening, sorry, but, we came to the conclusion, at least two of us, that you are indeed a tool. But back to Redbeard. As I said, he used to get so much press in the trades. I remember when I went to Dallas to go do Mornings on the Edge. The edge, the cutting edge of rock. And I said to myself, I've got to tune in and hear this Redbeard guy. This guy's got to be amazing. He gets so much press. And I tuned in to the station he was on. I can't remember. It was the rock station there. And I'm listening, that can't be right. No, let's retune. Yeah, that's him. He said his name. He was so freaking boring.
Put down the mic.
It was like listening to somebody who had taken Quaaludes and was just kind of boring on the radio. But I think what it was is his name made him famous. Think of the other jocks that, have funny names. Oh, there's so many of them out there. Bubba the Love Sponge. It gave people something to grab onto. Didn't necessarily mean they were any good or they were interesting or they were really talented or funny.
No.
They just had this wacky name.
Yes.
It was a very common thing, come up with a wacky name and people will listen. Or you could be the institution. Scott Muni, always the institution in New York. I mean, a guy had some talent. I never cared listening to him. To me, he was just kind of boring, but, hey, whatever floats your boat. There's a guy locally here in Austin. I don't know how I ended up talking about this radio stuff, but it's okay. I mean, it's my time.
It doesn't make sense. I don't understand it.
It's my airtime, man. I can talk about whatever the hell I want. There's a guy here in Austin. It's on KUTX, which is part of KUT, the University of Texas. University of Texas, by God. Now, it used to be on KUT in general. They had both a combination of music and NPR. And the ratings on KUT are just astronomical. There are so many hairy-legged women here in Austin that listen to KUT, it's just beyond imagination. But they split up and they bought another FM signal, and now KUTX is like the music, AAA sort of thing. But there's one guy they have on there. His name is John Aielli. And I was mentioning him the other day to somebody, and they said, well, he's an institution. I said, yeah, he should be in an institution. This guy... A lot of people think it harkens back to the old progressive FM days where people would just talk about whatever. But this guy, he reminds me of that crazy guy in high school that would sit in the corner talking to the wall. Because that's what it sounds like to listen to him.
He's an idiot.
I would recommend you check him out. I think he's on, is he on Morning Drive? I think he might be. Wow. I couldn't imagine listening to that guy in morning drive. I would want to drive my car like right into a wall that had John Aielli's name on it. He is the most ponderous, boring, imbecilic radio personality, and I don't even want to call him a personality, I've ever heard in my life.
They think I'm crazy.
I would rather stick needles in my eyes than listen to John Aielli. But he is the perfect example of just, he outlived the blues. That's what happens in radio. That's what happens with a lot of entertainment type stuff. If you've been around long enough, you must have some value, people think. Not necessarily. You just been around long enough. You just outlived everybody else. You just kept your head under the radar and, didn't get fired. There's a lot of them out there. They've just created a big name for themselves because they've been around so long. And in reality, they're just, it's like worse than listening to paint dry. Because let's face it, the personality that's really going to be like pushing it and doing stuff and out there, they have more of a chance of getting whacked, getting fired, right? Because they're actually doing something different, as opposed to the boring guy who talks about the music. And yes, that song on the third track on side B, playing the kazoo. Actually, the second kazoo is Mortimer Fergenheimer. People really care about that?
No.
No one really cares about that. There is one interesting radio station here in Austin. It's called Sun Radio. And I think it's like a loose conglomeration of a number of different low wattage transmitters. But they kind of play an odd mix of country music and AAA. It's actually kind of interesting to listen to. There's a couple of really decent jocks on there that I've heard. There's one girl I've heard that's kind of okay. But like so many other music-related radio stations, they get all tied up into talking about the music. It's all about the music, man. Talk about the music, because it's all about the music. Like as if music is the only thing people care about. It's like talk radio, right? It's like as if politics are the only thing people talk about. No, that's not true.
Not yet.
You know that's not true. I always said with a music radio station, man, you should be talking about all kinds of stuff. Things that are top of mind, things that people are talking about. You don't know what those things are? Go hang out at Starbucks and listen to what people are talking about. Go hang out on the street corner and listen to what people are talking about. And people don't sit around talking politics all day. People don't sit around talking about music all day. Music stations, that's all they do. They talk about music. Hey, wasn't that a great track? And, another thing that always drove me crazy about music radio stations is you have to pretend. If you're the announcer, you have to pretend to like everything you play. Why can't you come on and go, boy, what a useless piece of garbage that song was. Shoot me if I ever play that on the air again. People would be like, wow. Yeah, the guy has an opinion. The guy actually, likes good stuff. I like that song. How could he not like that? And how many times did I come out of Journey and just want to say, oh, the biggest piece of horse pucky I've ever heard in my life.
Wow.
And I'm sure even somebody like Rush Limbaugh sometimes wants to talk about something other than politics. Politics. Especially in this day and age where we want to kill each other for talking about politics. People's life on talk radio doesn't revolve around politics. You don't have to talk about politics all the time. Of course, I realize that's what you've targeted in on, and that's what's been successful. And radio has always been and also ran, oh, it worked over there, so we'll try it here. That works great over there, so we'll try it here. Well, why don't you try this? No, we can't try that. That's never been done. It's never been successful. Well, maybe because nobody's ever tried it. Well, yes, they tried it in Sheboygan once, and it didn't work. Well, maybe they didn't do it right. Oh, that doesn't matter. We're going to do it works over there. Because if it worked over there, it'll work over here. And the music radio is the same thing. I think back to the playlists that we used to have during the old Lee Abrams Superstars format.
Hey!
Lee Abrams, of course, was nominated as the enemy of rock radio. And I know Lee. I think Lee's a great guy. And a lot of his stuff is really great. But there were certain songs on those playlists, that we used to have on that Superstars format that we couldn't play. You couldn't play any Grateful Dead, except for very few markets. Other things that didn't get played that were also, immensely popular. But for God's sakes, we could play that Foreigner song 18,000 times in a row. It just didn't fit with the format. Instead, let's play that Yes song for the 5,968th time this week.
In today's society, well, you can't be too careful with the types of music that we're selecting for the youth and the teens and the youngs. And there's so many different varieties of entertainment in this day and age. There's television, radio. We've got the movies and video cassettes to contend with, as well as other different things throughout society that we all, I think, need to take a closer look at, just kind of take a good close look at and see it right up close there. And furthermore, and I think that's about what we can expect this year.
I hated art rock. Art rock sucked with very few exceptions. King Crimson was kind of interesting, sometimes. But it was like trying to make rock and roll respectable. Rock and roll wasn't respectable, it was always disrespectable. Disrespectable? It was something your parents said. How can you listen to that crap? And then these people are trying to make it respectable by putting jazz into it or classical, learning all these crappy runs. Oh, how many times did I come out of Journey and just want to say, that is the worst piece of garbage I have ever heard in my life.
I'm the happiest guy.
He's the luckiest guy.
'Cause I just bought a new Ford.
From a wonderful dealer.
Wow, what a dealer!
For a Ford or a fine used car.
I hate to interrupt, but I think you spent too much time in the discos during the 70s. Village people rotted your brain.
It's the John Ford Podcast, the Evening Rancor.